well, so it's my honor and my duty to say a few words to begin. You have forgotten one important thing, the magnificent book on Bruno Kreisky that Paul Lendvai has written. Well, if we are in Vienna, so this deserves a mention. And so I'll tell you two little stories of Budapest where I just came back from. It's so close. I'm commuting more or less. There is a radio station in Budapest, one of very few independent radios, that is in the habit of asking various people in public life to ask questions of their listeners. So I was the last to ask such a question from the listeners, and I asked them, given the political situation in the country, would you advise your growing children to flee abroad? 89% of the listeners answered with yes. All right. Well, this is not a representative opinion poll, of course. This is, are the listeners of a more or less opposition radio. So just a few hundred people. Still. And the other little story, just to give you, the atmospherics, as it were. Day before yesterday, in Hungary's parliament, a deputy secretary of state leapt to his feet and said the following. George Soros is Satan, and satanic things are going on anyway, such as abortion, same-sex marriage, gender theory, and I forget what. Oh, yeah, immigration. And these satanic things are destroying the fabric of European societies, but there is a cure for these satanic goings-on, is the rosary. It's the rosary. You pray about the rosary and so on and so forth. And, okay, so that's quite extreme. It was even some pro-government people said that it was not quite the desired style. But Hungary is really in a very strange, let's put it that way, in a very strange situation, a very peculiar situation. And Paul Lendvai has written a lot about that, and I'll ask him a few questions that are tailored to allow him to talk about his book. That's, after all, the topic of today. And there are indeed a few questions I'm going to ask him to which I don't know the answers. And I hope that I will find out from him what we should think about these things. So my first question is, do you think, Polly, that the transformation of Eastern Europe, and especially of Hungary, from democratic enthusiasm to autocracy and ethnic hatred, were necessary?
It is a very provocative question. Otherwise, I couldn't expect the meeting with you to start with a provocative question. I don't think it was necessary,
inevitable.
But it was inevitable. I think someone will come here tomorrow, day after tomorrow, who wrote a very interesting piece about the changes in Eastern Europe, a German professor, in 90 or 89 or 90, where he almost predicted the difficulties which will emerge if you simultaneously want to change the society from a dictatorship, and even if it has become very sloppy during the late period of the Kadarism, into a functioning democracy, and at the same time reform the economy from a command economy to a free market. And these parallel developments clashed with each other, not only in Hungary, and came absolute disappointment of wide segments of the population. It was a double misunderstanding. In the West, one underestimated the depth of the crisis, the social disintegration, and the lack of the civilized norms, and how deep it was. And in Hungary, one, and not only in Hungary, also in other countries, overestimated the willingness of the quote-unquote West to help this transformation with magnanimous credits and so on. And this double misunderstanding, both on the parts of the people and on the part of the Western politicians, also large segments of the media, led to it that it became a fantastic surprise, even for me, that, for instance, opinion polls showed in the 90s, already in the mid-90s, that the people were looking back at the Kadar era, many of them, nostalgically. And as the various questioners, it turned out that one of the great politicians, statesmen, was János Kadar. And all the events, the unmasking, what he did, how he betrayed his friends, how he betrayed the country, how he betrayed Imre Nagy, what's happened hasn't changed that he still ranks as one of the great Hungarian statesmen.
Polly, we know worse. A few days ago, Julian Vlad, the last commander of the Romanian Securitate, has died. And his death was greeted by an enormous number of necrologies in which he was called a great patriot, one of the last of the great Romanians who tried to save the country from Russian, Hungarian, and Western interference that some people call the Romanian Revolution. And this has been published in the largest circulation newspapers of Romania.
I have to defend Romania because they published as the first this book on Orban.
Well, that's easy because it's about Hungary, yeah, quite.
Also, they published the book, The Hungarians, in 4 editions, my big book. Anyhow, so what I want to say is simply, I agree, I was very surprised, baffled in Geneva when my younger days I was director of the Radio Austria International, the equivalent of Bush House in the BBC, and we went to a meeting in Geneva. It was one of the good customs that one always had this meeting in Geneva and not in Bucharest. And there a Romanian-born cab driver, in those days, it was 10, 15 years ago, tried to convince me how Ceausescu, how good he was.
Yes, yes, yes.
And that's, of course...
I remember how good he was.
Anyhow, so... but at least they were not in the government, some of these people, which happened in Hungary. But anyhow, what I want to say is that this nostalgia, this disappointment, and then, of course, another thing that the lack of democratic traditions. One shouldn't forget that Hungary had perhaps 2 years of democracy between 45 and 47, and Hungary had the longest authoritarian rule between 1920 and 1945. And the result was that the memory of the Russians, who several times in Hungarian history played a key role in suppressing revolution, 1849, and so on, this development has not changed, that the country became free, hasn't changed the basic ingredients, no democratic tradition, no civil tradition, no civil society, and it turned out that all the demons of the past, very soon after the changeover, already appeared. Unfortunately, some of the best people like you left parliament, and then came the coalition of the Free Democrats, who were the real opposition in the last days of communism, and the post-communism. Post-communists, which was like a alliance or a marriage between a prison director and the last inmates. And this was the situation. Bit of corruption, very little compared to the all-pervading stench which you can feel if you know the language and the people in Hungary and above all in Budapest. And a lot of other factors, the resentment against the West, the way how the West, how the EU, etc., treated the East European countries, including Hungary, the feeling you were once again in the hands of strange foreign powers. And of course, another thing, there was absolutely no processing, discussing really the past in Hungary. And this leads to the major question, which is the key to the hopes and to the problems of this curious country, the national issue. You can't forget that Hungary was truncated in 1920, 4th of June, lost 3/3 of the territory, 40% of the population, and 3 million people came under foreign rule. People who previously were at the upper end of the hierarchy and were running these countries as an elite in Transylvania, in Upper Hungary, Slovakia, South Slovakia, and in the part which went later to Yugoslavia. And Hungary lost the territory. It was a reckoning for the past, for the treatment of the minorities in Hungary itself, which was abominable, but it was not an ethnic nationalism. If you professed to embrace the Hungarian culture or the language, you were admitted. The first non-noble prime minister of Hungary was a Donauschwab. And this meant that 500,000 Slovak, 600,000 Jews, 700,000 Germans became Hungarians, and this tilted the balance in favor of Hungary in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy within the Hungarian part. And this came to a sudden end with Trianon. Hungary became a much smaller country, and this was the basis for the nationalism, for trying to regain the lost territories. It was an unjust treaty, a diktat at Trianon, like Saint-Germain. But what's happened was that the Hungarians never really coped with the past before, neither during the Horthy era nor after, during the long era of communism. It was pushed under the carpet. And so, of course, it was unjust because there were some territories where the Hungarians were clearly in clear majority and bordering on Hungary. Anyhow, we all know how the map of Europe was redrawn. But this issue, the national issue, was something which is one of the basic factors in modern Hungarian history and explains perhaps also why in Hungary the changeover and the development then to the authoritarian regime of Viktor Orbán took a different form than, for instance, in Slovakia, where the short episode of Mečiar was followed by a democratic experiment, or even in Romania. And it is, of course, true that in all of these countries you have a high degree of corruption, a high degree of disappointment. At the same time, of course, you want to be part of Europe. All questioners, all opinion polls show that the majority of people, in Hungary too, 70%, I think, profess to be in favor of the European Union and Europe. And then came, of course, also the political leadership, partly the remnants of the previous regime, partly new people, but it was a motley collection, and the result was that the Hungarians lost the faith in democracy and the ability of the political elite. There were many curious and colorful events. A prime minister who admits that they were lying to the public before 200 MPs, which got into the hands of the opposition led by Viktor Orbán. This is all part of the history. There were colorful features, essentially Hungarian features. It's happened nowhere, such a thing. But it all contributed to the disappointment of the public opinion. And Hungary is inasmuch special that you had a different person and a different type of development after the defeat of the social liberal government.
If this is so, then how do you explain that countries allegedly with other traditions and other heritage are so much similar? The loss of democratic enthusiasm and a descent towards authoritarianism is present in the whole of Europe, including the West. You know, you say that our recent history has been colorful. Well, what do you make of the Czech Republic, whose president is a drunkard, who will say the craziest things on television? You can't get more colorful than that. And what about the colorful features of Polish politics, where curses, dramatic Shakespearean curses on the heads of opposition MPs are, you know, proffered in parliament by the leader of the regime? I mean, look, I know that we Hungarians are very special and very extraordinary, but I wish we were more extraordinary, and for example, we would be an exception and be enthusiastic partisans of democracy, which doesn't seem to be the case anywhere. I don't want to abuse the hospitality of this magnificent city, but if you allow me just a little snide remark on the coming Austrian elections, I mean, what? Are we so extraordinary? I don't think so. I think that I can discover very, very similar things, very similar words, very similar gestures, and of course there are differences. What you mentioned, you know, the Trianon experience of Hungary, that's indeed very, very serious. And the difference between Hungary and Austria was that the Austrian Republic in 1918 and until 20 has accepted, had accepted the new status. And that has given Austria 14 years, 15 years of adventurous democracy. I know that it was not only destroyed in 34. Something happened also in 27, when, of course, the Justice Palace was set to fire and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, there's a great difference. Still, there is a republican tradition in Austria, and we don't have such a tradition. That is true.
This sounds almost as a high-level defense of the Orban regime.
Come on.
No, it is really. No, I mean, if everywhere the situation is so bad,
no.
Everywhere are drunkards. I don't think Orban is drinking. No one said about it. Then everybody is corrupt. I had the great honor of meeting President Zeman for several hours, and he offered very good Bordeaux red wine at about 12 o'clock. I have even on tape, and in my next book I shall quote from my impressions. So as he was so nice to me, I can't comment on what you said. the record speaks for itself, what he is saying in public, etc.
Now the Czech Republic will elect
And
itself
I met,
a new government.
imagine, I met even now the present devil, who is great
Babiš.
articles are scribed, Mr. Babiš. You know why? Because I've appeared, despite my accent, in Austrian television for some years, where you were engaged in Hungarian politics, and these people somehow looked at Austrian television. That was a window to Western Hungary, but also to Slovaks and Czechs. And Mr. Babiš's father already looked at the various reports from the Austrian television, and I met him. And then he came to Göteborg, where I lead the discussions at the Europa Forum. There he was too. And I would say there is a great difference between him, and then we are coming to our compatriot, former, in my case, the present prime minister in Hungary, who has never worked in his life a day. Mr. Babiš and his father worked very hard. I mean, this fantastic empire he built up, it didn't happen that suddenly someone gave him a present. No, that on the way there were perhaps little things on the march of legality that is something for the court. But he worked very hard. He had told me all the details of his experiences and successes.
So did Mr. Trump.
And you see, in Czech Republic, he has a clear, at the moment, a clear majority.
I know.
But in the Czech Republic, also, Karel Schwarzenberg got 44% of the votes. I couldn't imagine a prince with his background in Hungary being even able to stand for the presidency, let alone to get 44%.
If you think that's a good
thing. So I don't want to defend the Czechs, or for that matter, despite my prejudice now for the Romanians, but I think it's not the point that the others. The question is, why is that in Hungary it ended up in 2010 in a different situation, with 2/3 of the vote going to this party. 2014,
43%.
2/3 of the seats, 52% went in the first election and 44 at the second. But in the meantime, the electoral law was changed. But it is a fact, and it is also a fact that in Hungary, the regime, the political body, was more radically and more deeply transformed than in any other country.
That's true.
And another thing is special for Hungary. Here now I am speaking for Hungary. It is an authoritarian system, but people can travel. You can appear here, you can go back, you can write whatever you want abroad.
I'm on the Berufsverbot.
And
I'm on the Berufsverbot.
Yes, but you can write.
Yes.
Berufsverbot is something different.
Yes.
See, I was 3 years on the Berufsverbot when I came out of jail in the old days, in the hard days of Stalinism, but I couldn't travel, I couldn't write, and you can write.
Absolutely.
And you can travel, and people can do whatever they want, as long as they don't violate the law. So it's a great difference. For 80,000 people went onto the streets to protest the planned closure of the Central European University. Would be impossible in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, where the Soros supported university was closed, and the foundation of the Open Society. So there is a great difference, but nevertheless, it is therefore a unique system now, I would say, in the whole of Europe. What's in Hungary is a unique system, and that was part of the effort I put in this book, not only on Orban, but trying to explain how is it possible that what's happened in Hungary. So that is today a special case.
Yes. Let me just add something to this because I think it's of some interest. You see, what normally is called corruption in Hungary is a very specific, it's a very peculiar thing. It's not classical corruption. It's not something that is done surreptitiously by state servants to enrich themselves. It is rather, that happens of course too, but what is specific and what is important is that very important state assets are simply given as gifts to various groups, political groups and regional elites and so on and so forth. And the sums appropriated don't actually serve the private aims, the private goals of some private persons, but are set aside for political reasons and for political objectives, political purposes. So the state is redoubled. There is a public administration which is like any state administration, but there is a suprastate of sorts that will, for example, buy up all the Hungarian press. There was a moment when in one single day, a company that is very close to the person of the Prime Minister has bought 192 media outlets, one day, okay, radio stations, newspapers, television programs, etc. And these are sums that actually have been set aside by various procedures, state credits, etc., etc., and also state institutions or circles of high-placed officials are acquiring enormous landed estates, companies, and so on and so forth. That it doesn't mean that they can use those estates and companies for any purpose whatsoever. They have to be in the service of the strategic aims established by the suprastate, and the suprastate and the proper state are led by the same person. By the same person. So that's quite unique. That is true.
And
that's one thing.
It is not only that. It is of course one has to say that Babiš worked for building up this fantastic empire in Czech Republic, and I must tell that also speaks for the Czechs. Not only Schwarzenberg they accept Babiš, who is a Slovak, who is taking lessons to perfect his Czech ability to speak perfect Czech. I just want to say that is also unique. But in Hungary, you have a different situation. But you mentioned this man is not just a man. It is someone 20 years or 15 years ago you would have called him when you live near there because he was the gas fitter who was doing the gas or electricity. He had absolutely no training, nothing, but went to the same school as the prime minister. And after the Fidesz got the majority, absolute majority, 2/3, he became a very successful entrepreneur.
He's the richest person
in
the
country. He became the 5th richest man in Hungary. 5-fold increase in his assets last year. And even by Austrian standards and many others. And this is, of course, unique in us inasmuch as the state is the carrier.
He's just a manager of Mr. Orbán's state.
That's what you say. We can't prove
that's
it.
what is the general belief.
Yeah, and he was attacked in parliament by opposition people, that these people are only cronies.
That brings me to the next question I wanted to ask you. Do you think that Mr. Orbán's personality and his characteristic strategy had been decisive in the fate of contemporary Hungary?
I thought you would ask about his personality.
Yes, that's.
And although it is a long quote, I take the liberty of quoting Sir Isaac Berlin about the role of the personality. Isaac Berlin said in an interview with an Indian journalist and scientist, a very interesting interview, which was first published in French, interestingly. I believe in pluralism and don't believe in historical determinism. At critical points, at turning points, when factors appear more or less equally balanced, chance, individuals, and their decisions and acts, themselves not necessarily predictable, indeed seldom so, can determine the course of history. I don't believe in a libretto of history phrased by Herzen, who didn't think that history was a drama with acts, which recognizable pattern like Marx and Hegel. Although, of course, there is a great impersonal factors which determine the shapes of the lives of individuals and nations, I see no reason to see history as an autobahn from which major deviations cannot occur. One can be a patriot without being nationalist. I believe there are moments in history when individuals or groups can freely alter the direction of things. Not everything is predictable. Men are free agents within narrow limits. The limits exist, but within them there is space for choice. And he mentions, for example, Churchill in 94, Lenin, and so on, as personalities. We haven't much choice. Let's say 1%, but that 1% can make all the difference. And this 1% was that partly due to the help by George Soros, who is today regarded as the devil incarnate in Hungary, but everywhere where the authoritarian tendencies are strengthening. He was the accident of history, if you wish, that someone coming from a very poor family with a group of similar-minded people from similar backgrounds managed to capture the leadership of a group, getting rid of the more liberal people, and led, this is the single most successful political party in recent history in Europe. So many elections. And there are very few politicians who are able, after a defeat, to recover and then to conquer the majority. And that's what's happened in Hungary after Orban, as the youngest prime minister at the age of 35 in 1998, at the age of 35, the youngest prime minister in Hungarian history in that time in Europe, until 2002. And then he lost the elections. He lost the elections in 2006. And then 2010, by the time the socialist liberal governments ruined their own reputation, primarily their own mistakes, he became the victor. And won, and he said once, we have to win only once, but then really big. And that's what's happened in 2010. And ever since then, he and Hungary was leading the way back. First, it was all surreptitiously undercover in 2014, which is also an extraordinary thing. His major statements were made not in parliament, but at a public meeting in Romania, in the former Hungarian Transylvania, where he announced in 2014, July 28th, that he is in favor of the illiberal state and the liberal democracy. The liberal democracy is out, and let's have a look at the successful countries. There were some problems with the successful countries later: Turkey, Russia, China, Singapore. And he regards Azerbaijan as a master state, with Aliyev at the top. And he even paid his respects and his foreign minister, the father of Aliyev, who was 18 years in the Soviet Politburo and had great services because he once helped Brezhnev when he was already under the influence of Alzheimer and didn't know which page he has to turn in his speech. This man was the party leader of Azerbaijan and became then the first president, like several others. Anyhow, so he declared that, and he carried out this policy without any hesitation with this group, without any major opposition against him within his party. You mentioned Bruno Kreisky. I written the first biography of him, and he was the most successful Austrian politician. 3 times absolute majority, twice relative majority. And he met every week the president of the trade unions called Anton Benya, and he had the greatest difficulties with the young, very able finance minister Hannes Andros. He wasn't a dictator. He couldn't even dictate every personal decision in his own party, despite these fantastic successes. There is no public opposition in the Fidesz to Orban. And the fact is that his position is unassailable, and that someone can build this up. It shows a major talent in politics. Very interesting parallels were also to Mussolini, who started from left of the center in the same way as Orban started. But he didn't become a Mussolini. He doesn't go yet beyond certain limits. But the main question is, how long can he stay in power? How long can he change the entire structure of the country? And I think it is undeniable also that with his lack of any kind of moral or personal scruples, he was the first leading politician who recognized the fantastic chances in the refugee crisis for a single party leader who says that we want to preserve our country's ethnic cleanness. And the Hungarians, up to this moment, the majority of the Hungarians supported him and support him. And this question, the issue of the refugees in a country which, as you know, after 56, 200,000 refugees through Austria went to the world, or there are twice as many people today from Hungary looking for work than the number of refugees in 1956 and 7. Nevertheless, there is no major opposition to him, and this shows, in contrast to Poland, where there are similar tendencies, but the number one man in the background is not nearly so clever as Orban is, Kaczynski. So it is, after all, incredible. And the other factor is, of course, the lack of credible opposition, partly undermined by their own stupidity, partly by petty corruption, partly by Fidesz. But the fact is that 6 months or 8, when next elections are in April 2018, the chances are that the greatest party will be the party of non-voters and indifference, but nevertheless, every opinion poll says that he could get once more the absolute majority. So all this must be in connection with his ability as a political leader. And this shows that in a situation like this, as Isaac Berlin said, this is the 1%, which is the difference between Hungary and the countries equally faced with grave problems like the Czech Republic or Croatia, and so on. So it means that there is a role, there is a kind of role of personality which one mustn't underestimate. This is true of the democracies, and this is true also of the half-authoritarian regimes which emerge as a result of a successful, quote, strongman, unquote. And this is what I try to show, the interrelationship between Hungarian history and also this, and emergence of one person with a group around him, which is also unique. There is no other country where 10 or 15 people who went together to college and stayed together in very small rooms. I even went to this college in Budapest, got stuck together, and now the same people who were on the first 5 slots, positions on Fidesz list in 1990 is one prime minister, one of them is president of the republic, and one of them is president of parliament. The other is sitting as the chairman of the chair of the faction in Strasbourg. All of them, after all, studied in a little bit longer or shorter periods. Orban only for 3 months in Oxford, and none of them has ever worked but became a professional politician. This is also an interesting feature. Yes. Anyhow, this is what I wanted to show, that it is also partly the explanation why Hungary today is different from the other countries.
There's also, you know, I've been fighting with Mr. Orbán for God knows a quarter of a century now, and and I knew him well at once upon a time, and I can indeed tell you that he is a very gifted and intelligent man, and with a very strong will and very great energy, and so on and so forth. There's one thing though, you mentioned that he came from poor conditions, but that was a socialist country. That means that from the age of 10, he was taken over by school. He spent his youth in the best schools. So that would be this, yes. This would be totally impossible today under his reign for a similar boy from similar backgrounds to have his career now would be impossible. The social inequalities being
well, you have to know that his father.
I know
his father was very successful as a party member and in a collective, and once went to even Libya, and he visited him. So that, and his mother also went to study. So it was an upcoming group socially under Kadarism.
Of course, like in
all of Eastern Europe.
All of Eastern Europe, of course, that was a society with a very great deal of social mobility, of course, and so I knew him very well, and also I know his family and all that, father too, and indeed, all these men in this family are people of iron will. That's quite characteristic. Nevertheless, there are even a few even more peculiar features of this. I don't want to go into any personal details. That's not my style. Namely, that the sort of authoritarian regime Mr. Orbán has built up indeed very successfully, winning elections. He will certainly will the next elections too, and he might even have a huge majority. Again, and again and again and again, and you know, this might go on, depending, of course, on his health and whether he really wants to go on. He might get bored one day, but as kings do.
I don't think this danger is very strong.
No, I don't think so. But what is happening? This is not a typical dictatorship. This has some features that are really close to what is happening, to what was happening in interwar Germany, in one respect, as it was shown by the specialist literature on National Socialism, especially by Ernest Frankel's book on the double state. And namely, that the public administration, traditional public administration and bureaucracy has been destroyed. All the institutions that are at the basis of a modern governance, research institutions, but you know, the Office for the Protection of Monuments, land survey, archaeological review, for you know, building things, they are liquidated. They don't exist any longer. There's no office for the environment. I know that in America, the Environment Office is headed by somebody who doesn't believe in global warming, but the agency still exists. In Hungary, it doesn't. It's nothing, zero. And, you know, the Institute of Labor. These are, you know, 120-year-old state institutions. The Hungarian state was always decentralized. It was traditionally built on the county level. The county has lost all its administrative power. There's no regional government. There's nothing between the prime minister and the local mayor. Nobody can band together. There are no horizontal ties between various administrations.
And the same is true of the justice system?
Yes. And so on and so forth. Many things are outsourced to other institutions. For example, Hungary is a non-religious country, basically. It's not like Poland. It's more like the Czech Republic, very irreligious. At the same time, a number of schools are outsourced to the churches who don't want them very much, because then they will have to pay, the families will have to pay, and that means that the church schools are not any longer the state system, so they can be transformed into A, elite schools for the rich, and white schools in which no Roma children can go, because the rules apply only to state schools. And a number of similar institutions.
All this confirms what I said about his ability.
Yes, but this is also a conception. It's also a conception. So, you know what, for example, the very, very ungifted opposition says always, this is a statist system with centralization and central bureaucracy, thinking that it is something like late Stalinist states. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. It is very badly described. What I found in your book, that there are very, very great instances of the very chaotic, improvised, and whimsical government, which takes always both the citizens and the rivals by surprise.
But you see, there is something which I've just written an article for Tablet, the Catholic Weekly in England and in Britain, and I studied the matter, but I just want to say that also personally, he is accused by people who know him that he is not racist, he is not anti-Semitic, he is not this or that, he is cynical, totally cynical. He wasn't baptized. He himself said he grew up in a totally different tradition, atheistic tradition, through the influence of a Calvinist pastor who is now a very powerful minister in charge of education and cultural institutions. He became a believer. He didn't marry his wife in church, who is Catholic, he is Protestant. 10 years later, he married in church, he was confirmed, and the two first children were not baptized, became baptized, and now the Catholic Church, the dignitaries are sitting there, every major event, and there is very interesting, in contrast to Germany or Austria, no church dignitary, bishop, except for the Bishop of Vats and the other Bishop of Fabigny, the evangelical bishop, said a word in favor of the refugees. And now there were not very nice events in a place where the local hotel, a pension owner wanted to invite a few legally residing in Hungary poor refugee children and refugees, and there was an outcry in the village, and his car was damaged, the mayor had to resign, and the cardinal didn't say anything against it. But what I wanted to say that it is then, of course, also a feature in the sense of Machiavelli, is a cynical leader, and when you say you knew him well, you knew certainly better than I personally, although now I know, I think, almost everything what is important about him. Also perhaps things which I can't write because I can't prove them. And I met him in this institute for the first time and had, thanks to Michalski, Professor Michalski, a dinner with him. It was at the beginning of the 90s when he was still on the left liberal side. But anyhow, the point is that he is a unique personality also. Another interesting feature is only colorful, that he is the man who is interested, except for power and perhaps money, in soccer. He is a tremendous soccer fan, and Hungary, he built his government more stadiums per head of the population, even in his own native village. 1,800 people, the most elegant stadium, 3,500 people have faced. I visited the stadium incognito, very impressive. I never seen such a beautiful stadium. And that also means that there is more spent on the building of stadiums than on higher education. And that can be done too, because it is a government based on the principle of voluntarism. What the number one person wants, that they are doing, and those who don't want to do it will later disappear. That is the situation today.
The time is getting on, so I will renounce to my remaining questions, and I will ask the audience if they want to ask Mr. Lendvai, Professor Lendvai, any questions and or make any observations they want to make, and we'll have to finish quite soon because it has been going.
I just wonder about the changing of policy of Orban from critical to former Soviet Union, Russia, and then totally towards Putin and his system. And the other thing is about Jobbik. It seems that the main opposition is not from the left, but even from the more far right. Thank you.
Very, very good questions. Basic issues. Number one, the Russian tie, because it's generally always mentioned about Orban that he gave this speech in 1989 demanding the evacuation of the Soviet troops from Hungary. He attacked even in 2008, 2009, the Russian ties of the former socialist prime minister Gyurcsány, who was also, must say, very friendly with Mr. Putin. And he then got an invitation to attend the Congress of the United Russia. Apparently there he had a short conversation with Mr. Putin, and then came the basic issue, the power plant, nuclear power plant at Paks on the Danube, which was built by Russian firms, and it will be in a second phase, which experts say is not yet necessary and wasn't necessary at that time. A fantastic agreement, which basic provisions are kept secret for 30 years. Russia gives 10 billion euro credit, and this connection led to it that no other former Soviet bloc country in Eastern Europe has been visited so often as Hungary by Mr. Putin, and President Putin and Orban have a very good personal relationship too. And not only that, Hungary has spoken out, I mean the government, I mean Orban, repeatedly against the sanctions, not now, but from the very beginning. He also has very good relations with Erdogan. And the Russian tie means that basically not only Hungary, but also to some extent Slovakia and Czech Republic within the EU contribute to the disintegration. The interesting subject is the parallels and differences between Poland and Hungary, because in the question of the relationship with Russia, the Polish line is totally different. And so this is the line in Hungary, and the foreign minister was interviewed in Warsaw at a recent meeting by a writer who wrote the first very positive biography, a hagiography of Orban, Mr. Igor Janke, that isn't Hungary feels threatened by the Russian expansionist strategy? And Mr. Szijjártó, the foreign minister, said, I don't know what you feel. We in Hungary have no reason to be concerned about Russia. So this is something which is a basic difference, and it is also might be of interest for Austria after the next elections. The Jobbik issue is a relatively new right-wing party, which had at the last elections 20% percent, and today, even now, is the largest opposition party, was very, very extreme, racist, anti-Semitic, etc., like other extremist parties in France or in Austria. They have been moving outwardly toward the center, and the chairman of this party is someone who was even in the young Fidesz group previously, a certain former teacher, Mr. Vona. He was the one who accused Mr. Orban in parliament of being the richest person in Hungary and having cronies who pile up money and assets in their own names, but actually for his family. And Jobbik is, however, has lost some of the major attractions, such as nationalism, such as the refugee question, because they can only say that what Orban does, and they can only attack this corruption issue. There is one side effect, which is also the colorful feature, Professor Gaspar, I think, in Hungary, that the closest friend, Mr. Orban, who was the financier of Fidesz, without him, he wouldn't have become what he is today, was together with him in the army, in the university, stayed together, lived together. They broke ranks in 2014-15 because Orban decided he doesn't want to share power and to share the spoils with this man, who is now supporting more or less openly Jobbik. The great question is whether there will be certain methods which appear to happen now in the fight against the right wing, which is the only danger. That's also very interesting to Orban. And the question whether they, for instance, tear down the posters, placate, etc., in Budapest. So it's all on the edge of legality. But I think that for the moment, Jobbik is even useful for Orban, both the left and the right. The left is useful because the remnants of the free press, which is a couple of weeklies and a few internet journals, can be used as a pretext, as a decoration that Hungary is not Russia. And the right, the Jobbik, can be used for people who don't know Hungary, or politicians in Austria or France or England who don't read newspapers, who think that Jobbik is a terrible danger and Orban saves what's remained of Hungarian democracy and civil society from the Nazi or fascist upsurge. So this is the situation with both things.
Yes, two more brief questions and brief answers, please.
Thank you for your explanations. I have two questions. The first one, to my knowledge, a few years ago, Orban amended the constitution by erasing the word republic. What was the intention of that action? Secondly, I read recently in an article in the Standard that these illiberal democracies like Orban in Hungary and Putin in Russia and several others, they have a characteristic which means that they don't intervene that much in the economy.
In the?
In the economy of the countries,
yes.
You know, they let the people work as
yes,
they want.
Yes.
First, is that true? Secondly, how is the economical situation in Hungary? Is that improving? Is that acceptable for the people?
Very, very, very important question.
I will say something about the constitutional problem too. If
just
you allow
one
me.
sentence about the Constitution.
No, go on.
There is one American professor who is the only one who really studied Hungarian and lived in Budapest. She is regarded by the regime as an agent of Soros because he speaks Hungarian. Schepele, she is in Princeton, and she called it a constitutional coup d'etat. That's you will talk about the constitution. The second question is a very important question. It is so that the European Union is the first institution in history which finances a regime which daily attacks it and slanders it. The European Union and the transfer funds, between 3 to 5% of the Hungarian GDP comes from our tax payments all over, or the other countries too. And that's a key factor in the Hungarian economy. That is the absolute key. Number two, there are fantastic differences, social differences, much worse than before, particularly as to the Roma, but other segments of the population. But there is something what you mentioned that is very interesting. It's a kind of mixed economy. It's not state and private, but it is Orban's economy and the free market economy. And they don't interfere, only indirectly. I mean, when Mr. Gyurcsány's company was more often investigated and checked than any other, but this has happened, says a NEOS MP in Austria too, that people then send more tax collectors and people to have a look at the balance sheet. So, but if you don't immerse in politics and don't touch on someone who is close to Orban, the big major orders go to these groups, 80% or more. But then you can get on, and you can even finance perhaps opposition groups if you do it discreetly. So it's a cleavage in the country. You know, I've seen one said that there are two Englands, you see, the real and the other. And that is the situation now, and which means there are segments which can exist, but they are depending very much on the whims, as you said, of the regime, and there are no regulations which are lasting. But if you are a daring man, you can invest in Hungary. It's not easy.
As to the constitutional question, that's really quite interesting, and I wanted to intervene here because I think it's not well understood. I wrote an article at the beginning of the century. It's called "The Last Axis Power." It appeared in the Magyar Narancs Weekly, Hungarian Orange, but I won't explain why it's called that. And why is that? Hungary is the only country in the world that, to a very large extent, identifies historically and morally with the losing side in the Second World War. It is, you know, the heroism. Oh, it's coming. Alexander Gauland said very similar things, but those things are the words of a small opposition party leader, and in our case, they are in the constitution. It is considered that Hungary has been an independent country as a part of our heritage until the 19th of March 1944, when the Germans occupied Budapest. So what happened between 39 and March 44 is okay. And the illegitimate period lasts from March 44 to 1990, when the Russians went. This means that the Horthy era is part of our heritage, but the Democratic Republic between 45 and 48 isn't. And that's the reason why the word republic doesn't appear. Hungary, again, like before, like between the wars, is a non-republic, but it's not a monarchy. But it's certainly not a republic. A republic is not. It's not enough not to have a king in order to have a republic, as you know. Republic means something. It's a type of political community that is repudiated by the constitutional order of the country, and this has started before Orban. When the first parliament, I was still sitting in parliament. when there was a very symbolic debate which coat of arms we should accept for Hungary. One was the so-called Kossuth coat of arms from 1848 without a crown and without the angels in the two sides and so on. So no church, no monarch, no king, okay? And it was that coat of arms was the revolutionary coat of arms in 1848, in 1945, and in 56 during the revolution. And the first parliament under Prime Minister Antal has repudiated that, and it was a clear majority, including members of my own party then, who voted for the coat of arms with the crown and with the angels, which is a monarchic, dynastic coat of arms. So it was a republic with a crown. It's characteristic. Well, it's quite a pretty, coat of arms. As a piece of art, it's okay. But I don't hate it. But it was indeed the republican ethic has been rejected from that moment. That was 1990. And it was the same year when the Reichsverweser von Horthy, KUK Admiral, has been reburied, well, if not officially, but in the presence of the members of the government. So there was always an ambiguity. And today, even liberal authors, when speaking of the Hungarian soldiers in the Second World War, will talk about our troops, our soldiers. We occupied Ukraine. We entered, I don't know what, Belgrade or whatever. We attacked. I mean, can you imagine a self-respecting German intellectual speaking of the Wehrmacht in the terms of unsere Armee, unsere brave Soldaten? That's only extremists would do that. And this is the official discourse that's in the school books, etc., etc., etc. And this has a very important, it's not only, kowtowing to Nazis and so on. No, it has a very important, the continuity of the non-republican order. That's very important. So, of course, it is historically, of course, it's absurd because it's not at all like the Horthy era because things have changed. But morally and politically and constitutionally, it refuses even the paraphernalia of a republican democratic order. And this has been accepted by virtually everybody without a whisper of protest. So that's, if you wish, that's very grave. So I don't want at all to relativize the things, and the word republic has been erased, and I haven't personally met anybody who would have been sad that the Hungarian Republic is no more.
But he hasn't yet been crowned.
No, but no, he won't be crowned. That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. Of course, there are gestures in this. You know who our ambassador is to the Vatican? He's a Habsburg Archduke. But well, these are gestures to a few people. This is not what they're doing. What they're doing is indeed to build up also symbolically an authoritarian state. It's not abusing a democratic order. This is systematic. This is systematic. There's no elements of self-government, no elements of autonomy, no elements of personal independence. So this is really a terrible system, and is no consolation to us that the leader of the system is a gifted and forceful personality. And I must say, to close, that I'm very honored and very, very pleased that we could present this book here. I propose that you read that book. Probably couldn't say that because he has a self-interest in this. Is a very important, maybe the best book on the topic, and certainly a good read. Written by one of the most famous journalists in Europe today, who knows how to do it, a very skillful author. And I hope that you will find happier chapters to add to an ongoing history of Hungary and of Europe too. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.